lot of hate is swirling around, a lot of disinformation. A lot of people are coming out of the closet. A lot of people are taking off their hoods and their masks, and they're revealing themselves. So let's take a step back, America, especially you in this audience. You are true blue Americans, red-blooded Americans, and you don't like what you're seeing and hearing either, if I'm guessing right. On October 7, 2023, the slaughter of the Jews by Hamas, that didn't happen because the Palestinians were not given a state. It happened because they were given a state. Hamas slaughtered Israelis in ways that are so monstrous, so horrific, that not a single network or cable TV platform will show you the videos that terrorists took while decapitating, gang raping, mutilating, burning alive, and slaughtering innocent young people at a music festival and innocent families at kibbutzim, basically farmers. I asked France, Germany, Britain, Spain, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Finland, Iceland, and the rest of them who are now calling for a Palestinian state. Why won't you show your citizens what was done on October 7th? Why? Hamas executes, tortures, starves, and brutalizes the Palestinians in Gaza. Why don't you show what Hamas is actually doing? Why are you knowingly and intentionally covering up for Hamas? Why aren't you reporting how they use their hospitals and mosques and schools and homes and other civilian locations as military installations from which to attack Israel, to store ammunition and arms, as terrorist communication centers? Why are you censoring this information? Why are you knowingly and intentionally feeding lies to your citizens about Hamas, which is working hand in hand with the United Nations, UNRWA, is starving the people in Gaza the way Stalin starved his people to hold on to power, the way Mao starved his people to hold on to his power, the way Assad killed 600,000 of his own people, all Muslims, to hold on to power, the way in Yemen Muslims are slaughtering Muslims, 250,000 of them. Why don't you report about that? Two-state solution won't fix any of that. The evidence is everywhere of what Hamas is doing in videos, in photographs, in-person accounts, and so forth. Hamas is controlling the food distribution in Gaza by stealing it, consuming it, and when it has enough left over, selling what it chooses to whom it chooses at usury prices unaffordable to most of the people there. They're feeding their fellow terrorists. They're selling it to buy more arms. They're enriching their leaders, several of whom are billionaires and multimillionaires. Why aren't you reporting this on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post and the BBC and the Independent and all the rest of the radical left-wing Western media, self-hating, suicidal Western media? The enormous tonnage of food, water, and medical supplies. America, nearly 100 tons. The Israelis and others have shipped into Gaza. They've attempted to ship into Gaza, has more than enough food to feed the 2 million people there. Why don't you ask, media? Why don't you ask? Where's it gone? Where is it going? Why is the UN sitting on thousands of pallets of food and water? Why are the thousands and thousands of 18-wheelers sent into Gaza over the course of this war being hijacked at gunpoint? Who's doing that? There's evidence everywhere. Everywhere. Yet the Western media chooses to either ignore it or lie about it. Meanwhile, for purposes of perspective, Britain didn't send tons of food, water, and medicine to the Germans during World War II. Why not? In fact, they, like us, correctly targeted population centers in order to try and bring the war to an end. Israel's not doing that. It's doing the opposite. Dresden was bombed off the face of the map. Virtually every human being living there was incinerated in 2 nights of bombing by the RAF, followed by the Army Air Corps. Perhaps as many as 250,000 people were killed in 2 nights. It wasn't a military installation. It had no military value. It was called the Florence of Germany. We bombed Tokyo repeatedly. We bombed Berlin repeatedly. Population centers. We didn't give a damn if the people were eating or drinking or medicated. We wanted that war over. There was Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were not of military significance. We needed to end that war too. And by the way, I defend all the actions that we and our allies took. Imperial Japan and the Nazis had to be destroyed. Well, what about the modern day Nazis, the Islamists? No, apparently not. Because why? Let's be honest. Because it involves the Jews in Israel. That's why. These same quislings in the UK and France and these other Western countries, they wouldn't allow it to happen to their country. Oh, but you know what? Maybe they would. Maybe they would. No Churchill or Thatcher left in Europe, I can tell you that. But today, it's Israel that's fighting for its survival. And unlike Britain or Germany, Israel has done more to avoid civilian casualties than any country in modern history. That's according to John Spencer. Who is he? He's certainly the chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute, co-director of the Urban Warfare Project, considered the world's leading expert on urban warfare. Spencer also has pointed out that no other country in the world has fed the citizens of an enemy that is still in an active war. None. Israel is fighting Hamas. You know how many IDF soldiers it's lost? No, you don't. Why? Because the American media doesn't give a damn. The Western media doesn't give a damn. Who are these IDF soldiers? They're young men and women. They're the citizens of Israel. They come out of the restaurants and cafes. They're plumbers, they're electricians, they're truck drivers, they're doctors and nurses. They're regular people. How many of them have died? Nobody wants to know. Almost 1,000. Oh, Mark, 1,000? It's a nation of 9 million people. That would be like tens of thousands of our soldiers dying, on top of tens and tens of thousands of Israelis who were slaughtered by Hamas. Israel is surrounded by hundreds of millions of Arabs who've got more land than they know what to do with. They're surrounded, this tiny little democracy. And the funny thing is, they're the indigenous peoples of the area. They go back over 4,000 years. The archaeology proves it. They're the indigenous peoples there who are told to get out. Tell me, how many Christians are left in the Middle East? You know, Judaism was born right there in the Holy Land. Then Christianity was born right there in the Holy Land. 600-700 years later comes Islam. How many Christians are left in the Arab countries? Well, we have Coptic Christians in Egypt. They're under attack. They're being killed there as well. Tell me, how many Jews are left in any of the Arab countries? Two-state solution? Is this a joke? Israel's fighting Hamas. They're losing their sons and daughters. Hamas is still firing missiles into Israel. Hamas murdered scores of Israeli hostages, refuses to release the remaining 20 who are alive, who no doubt are starving, have been tortured, no doubt have been raped. Hamas has said repeatedly, nonetheless, we're going to keep attacking Israel. If we have another shot, we're going to take another shot. We're never going to give up. Yet Israel is told it is not doing enough to defeat the people in Gaza who, by the way, voted for Hamas. And every indication is that if an election were held today among the Palestinians, Hamas will win the election. The same Western media that since October 7th has used Hamas's casualty numbers as if they're fact, using the casualty numbers of a terrorist organization, repeating them day in and day out. And this despite the fact that experts, including professors from top universities, such as the Wharton School, mathematicians, statisticians, I've got it right here. Here, this report, this report, this report, this additional report, this report, this report that the media all have access to. Despite the fact that these experts are saying there is no way that the Israelis are committing the acts that Hamas is saying. There's no way that so many children and women are dying according to Hamas. The media keep reporting it, and they report it without these experts and without these reports. AP, Reuters, New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, all the rest, flat out propagandists, liars. The casualty rate among women and children, these reports tell us, these experts, cannot possibly be accurate. You know what's amazing? Hamas itself, a few months ago, they said their numbers are not accurate to try and cover themselves for when people actually figure it out. But the media keep repeating their numbers anyway, as do the UN. Why? The answer is quite simple. And what about Egypt? Egypt, you say. What does Egypt have to do with anything? Good point. Not a word of criticism. Why Egypt? Egypt borders Gaza. Egypt has built a huge wall to prevent the Palestinians in Gaza from leaving. People left Syria. They went into places like Turkey and Jordan and so forth. Egypt will not allow Palestinians to leave. Obviously, Israel can't because they come into Israel, which is who they attacked. But Egypt, Arabs, Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, no. The Egyptians refuse to allow the Palestinians into the Sinai Peninsula. They refuse to let them escape. Egypt is doing this out of internal politics, not for national security reasons. It doesn't want the Palestinians to flee into their country. Has anybody pressured Egypt? Has anybody heard anything about Egypt? No. Not a damn word. Of course, the way to end this is for Hamas to surrender, to release the hostages. They started the whole damn thing. They killed civilians in Israel. They're killing civilians in Gaza. But all the pressure is on Israel. The world could put pressure on Hamas. What has Britain done? Nothing. France, nothing. Germany, nothing. Now they're doing worse than nothing. So Hamas and its allies like Qatar's been behind this from day one. But there's others. And throughout Europe, and even in the United States, we have elements in the United States. They've launched a massive campaign against Israel in the media, heavily drenched in anti-Semitism, including these photos of emaciated babies published by the New York Times and others on their front pages, accusing Israel of actively starving these children. These are very, very horrific photos. They influence world leaders. They create anti-Semit, they're blood libels. That's what we Jews call them, because we know it leads to nothing but anti-Semitism and hate and the killing of Jews. It was a damnable lie, and the Times knew it when it ran it. That baby that it showed on its front pages a few weeks ago had cystic fibrosis. It had absolutely nothing to do with starvation. And you'll notice his mother wasn't exactly starving either. But the lie spread throughout the world, all the Western media. And the New York Times said, I guess we better fix this. And they put out a phony correction, not even a correction, on a different site that nobody reads. The New York Times covered up the Holocaust. The New York Times has been a mouthpiece for Hamas. And now the New York Times is covering up Hamas's role in the starvation of its own citizens. So Europe and the UN now are organizing a worldwide effort to push for a Palestinian state. It would be as if in 1945, on the brink of the defeat of the Third Reich, they were awarded the Third Reich with a country of its own. Let's say carved out of France or Britain. What do you think about that, France and Britain? Yes, reward them with their own country. What would this new state look like, this new Palestinian state? Where would it be exactly? What kind of government would it have? What kind of military would it have? Who is the Martin Luther King or Gandhi, the Palestinian figure, who would lead it? Who is it? How would you prevent the Islamist death cults from taking it over? Or making alliances with communist China or communist North Korea or fascistic Russia or Iran or fascistic Turkey for that matter? Many choices, you know. What about them getting ballistic missiles? How would that stop? I can hear the isolationists in our country. None of our business. That's Israel's problem. None of our business. And why are there no proposals from the West? Not a single one. Directly calling on a single Arab state to carve out parts of their countries for a Palestinian state. Why is that? You know, Palestinians, the vast majority of them came out of a little country called Jordan. Jordan is currently 70% Palestinian. The king is not. The queen is. Well, the king's father had a little problem several decades ago when the Palestinian extremists and Arafat rose up to overthrow the monarchy. And you know what they did? They killed them, and they imprisoned them, and they made sure, and chased off many of them, that these Palestinians would never come back to Jordan. No, they should be Israeli, don't you know? The land that is now Israel was Jewish long before these monarchies and military dictatorships that surrounded Israel ever existed. And why should, or how could Israel ever agree to its own suicide and the extermination of its own people, which would be not a two-state solution, but a final solution. I think some people are actually cheering for this. Israel could never agree to that. What these countries are doing, and the quislings and reprobates that run them are doing, emboldening Hamas and the other Islamic terrorists and all terrorists. The message these terrorists are receiving is that their terrorism works. Terrorism in London, Paris, Toronto, all other Western countries who've signed on to this despicable surrender of civilization to these barbarians, the barbarians are going to say, hey, this works. Just keep at it. And the more people you murder and rape and torture, maybe in other capitals of the Western world, the more likely these failing nations, and that's what they are, they're failing, the more likely they will be accommodating you. Not so in the United States with a strong leader like Donald Trump. He's onto this. Or in Israel with a strong leader like Netanyahu. These other countries think they will somehow escape the consequences of their appeasement, when in fact they are targeting themselves as the weak, pathetic fools that they are. And we see this poison spreading in our own country. The president is fighting, his administration is fighting it. In the Democrat Party and academia, in our media, it is spreading like a cancer. We see it spreading among many who we used to respect and consider one of our own, who have these podcasts and these platforms, who viciously question the Holocaust, who attack Churchill and are soft on Hitler, who spew the Jews control our foreign policy attack, blood libel, and now they're attacking evangelical Christians. Yes, and they're getting rich doing it. Look who's the Democrat nominee for mayor in New York, a Marxist, Islamist, Hamas-supporting demagogue. The Democrat Party leadership, Jeffries, Schumer, such quislings, they won't even denounce him. Just as the Republican leadership won't denounce the Jew-hating podcasters who narcissistically call themselves influencers. Thank the good Lord for Donald Trump and the righteous Gentiles. You are speaking out and standing up to this. You understand what's at stake. Two-state solution. You see, a Palestinian state will fix everything. Well, I have a little graphic of Africa here from the African Center for Strategic Studies. Christians in Africa are being slaughtered by the same Islamists. In Mali, in Burkina, in Niger, in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in Mozambique, in Chad, in Somalia. Wow. So if you give the Palestinians a state, this will stop? We're talking about radical Islamism here. We're talking about terrorism here. Here we have this from a French think tank of all places. Between 1979 and April 2024, they say we recorded almost 67,000 Islamist attacks worldwide. These attacks caused the deaths of at least 249,941 people. How will a Palestinian state fix that? Then I have another one. In Syria, the Syrian civil war killed more than 528,000 people. They believe over 600,000. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said. Those are Muslims slaughtering mostly Muslims. Wow. It's got to be the Jews in Israel. It's got to be Netanyahu, no? No. Then in Yemen, right now, according to the United Nations of all places, over 150,000 people have been killed by the Houthis, Islamists, who back Hamas, who are backed by Iran. Muslims slaughtering Muslims, as well as estimates of more than 227,000 in addition who've died from ongoing famine and starvation. Have you heard anybody talk about this? The reprobate who runs Britain, the coward and weasel who runs France, and all these failing Western countries? Have you heard any of them? How about your favorite podcasters? Have they gotten off their fat asses and have they talked about any of this? I don't think they have. And I haven't even mentioned China, which is slaughtering the Uyghurs. And by the way, Christians and Tibetans, maybe they deserve a new country too. Yeah, we know exactly what's going on here. The fact of the matter is this is a battle between the Marxist Islamists and the West. And other than the United States, we have a real leader in the state of Israel and a few other countries, in Argentina and so forth. The West is losing. In fact, the West is surrendering. In fact, the West is undermining those leaders in those countries who know what's going on and are fighting back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.